Happy Easter. Glad y'all made it here today, but I see some of you forgot something. Young man there in the bow tie, can you come up here a second? You forgot something. Come on up here. Let's welcome him up here. He didn't plan on this. Look at him. I like that bow tie.
Thank you.
What is your name?
Castle.
Castle. That's a cool name. Castle, you forgot something today. I know you don't know what it is, but stay right here. I'm going to get to here. Stay right here. Don't leave. Don't leave. You forgot your shades. Listen, Castle, your future is so bright, you need to wear shades, okay?
Yes, sir.
Happy Easter. Let's thank Castle. Shades made in China. So, speaking of shades, sunglasses, summer is here, or spring's here, summer's here. A lot of us are beach people. They're mountain people and beach people. We have a lot of beach people here. I love the ocean. I love to surf. I spent a lot of time in the ocean over the years. And a lot of times people will ask me, well, hey, we're going to this beach or we're going to this sea. And I'm wondering, how do I know if there are any sharks in the water? Is there any way to tell if there are sharks where I'm going to be swimming? And I said, yes, there is a test. It's an empirical test that you can take. I've done it many, many times, and it's 100% accurate. You ready? So if you're somewhere in Florida, Texas, California, you're right by the beach, and you're wondering, are there sharks here? This is how you test it out, okay? This is important. You walk out of the sand, walk into the ocean or sea, get about knee-high or waist-high, and then you take out your index finger and you dip it in the water, and then you taste it. And if it's salty, just a little bit, there are sharks in the water. Now, here's the deal. Don't be afraid. I've said this many times. Listen, I've been in many oceans and many different places. I've been way offshore. Listen, here's the deal. This has saved me many, many times from shark attacks. Listen, when I'm out in the ocean and I'm out there sitting my board, here's the deal. And if you're swimming, here's the deal. When you hear the music, get out of the water. Don't wait for the second, dun-dun. Just get out. Get out. Speaking of the ocean and the water, something really unusual and unexpected happened in the Gulf of Mexico a couple of weeks ago. I was looking at the weather and the charts and stuff, and I saw in this one report that after work on a Wednesday, there was going to be this unusual, anomalous set of large waves coming into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, that rarely happens. Maybe if there's some hurricane, some Cat 4, Cat 5 that's spinning out there, it will send us some big waves. But when there's not a Cat 5 or there's not a storm, rarely in the Gulf of Mexico do we get big waves. But I was looking at the charts and looking at the reports, and it looked like it's going to line up. So I called a buddy of mine who I've surfed with for a long time. I said, hey, listen, after work on Wednesday, we need to go down and check out these waves. It could be 8, 10 feet, which is significant in the Gulf of Mexico. So, met my friend at Starbucks after work. We drove down there. We drove past the city drove through the city of Enchantment, Lake Jackson, through Clute, through Freeport, all the way to Surfside. We get there. There's a friend of mine getting out. The guy's getting out of the water. I said, how were the waves? He said, powerful. I said, what does that mean? What do you mean powerful? He goes, well, they're just powerful. I said, all right. So the water's still cold. I put my wetsuit on, had everything to go. And listen, I don't wait for my friends. So I just left my friend there at the car as he was kind of messing around with his board and waxing it. I said, I'm going, all right? I'm getting out there in this. So I walked out on the jetty because I didn't want to paddle out in these big waves. So I walked out about 150, 200 yards on the jetty. That's how far the waves were breaking. And when you're jumping off the jetty, which I do not recommend, okay? It's dangerous and stupid, but if you do that, you've got to time it, right? You have to time it when a big set waves come in, and then once the waves cover up all the kind of the barnacles and reef and rocks, you jump out on your board and into the ocean safely. If you don't, you get really messed up, which is a whole nother message we can talk about later. But I timed it right. I got out on my board. I got out there. I was made it past, the rocks and stuff, and I'm sitting out there waiting for a wave. Now, the water that day, Surfside's usually a little bit cleaner than Galveston, but the waters were like Galveston, right? We're talking about you're surfing in chocolate milk. I mean, it was just murky and dirty. But these waves were significant. Some of the biggest waves I've ever been a part of in Surfside in the Gulf of Mexico. So as I was waiting the waves, finally one came. I said, I'll take it, It's big, but it's Texas. So I tried to get up on the wave, and boom, that wave just knocks me over the front of my board, plunges me down in the ocean, and I'm spinning around in what we call the washing machine, just getting tumbled, okay? And so I think, okay, I kind of want to breathe. I want some air, right? So I'll just kind of go up. And I couldn't get up. I said, this is crazy. It was like there was a 300-pound bully sitting on my chest at recess. I couldn't get up. And I was struggling. So I said, I kind of started to panic a little bit, and I said, okay, I'm going to open my eyes, okay? Because one of the methods is when you're getting work, you don't know where you are, you open your eyes and you swim to the light, because that's where the surface is. So I opened my eyes, and then I started swimming and swimming and swimming, and I realized I had zero visibility. And after a while, I realized, Ben, you're an idiot. You could be swimming either parallel or down deeper into the ocean. And let me tell you something, friends. In those seconds, I wanted and needed air. I was beginning to panic a little bit. So I just, for a second, got calm, finally resurfaced, and jumped back on my surfboard and lived to surf the rest of that day and another day. So the good news is I made it, right? I'm here on Easter 2022. That's the good news. I'm still alive, okay? The good news is, thank you. Yeah, thank you. My wife's clapping this. I'm alive. And some of you. And the good news is, as I look out right now, at the congregation here at 1111, none of you are submerged under a dark, murky wave in the Gulf of Mexico right now. None of you are drowning, it looks like, okay? But, if we could be real here today, and if we could kind of get behind the brand new ties and the suit and the new outfit, we would see and discover that a lot of us really are submerged under the murky waters of life. Maybe you're spinning around. Maybe you feel like you're at the bottom and you want to resurface. You want to get back to where you think you can be, but you're wondering if that's going to happen. And you're caught under this murky water, this massive wave of fear. Fear. When I was literally under the water getting worked around and trying to get out of that, my body was flooded with fear. And so many times, whether it's physical danger or emotional danger or financial danger or relational danger, we allow fear to get into our lives, and fear can eat us up, and fear can hold us down for a long, long time. If we could go back in time just a little bit this morning, and if we could interview those men and women, those first followers of Christ, we would find out that they were submerged in a wave of fear. Their leader, their hero, who they had given their life to, who they had served and sacrificed, had just been brutally tortured, beaten, and crucified and laid in a tomb. They were devastated. They were utterly disappointed. They were in massive amounts of grief, coupled with fear, wondering what will happen next to us. Could this happen to us? What are we going to do, as they were submerged in the murky waters of uncertainty so many years ago? Wondering, are we going to make it? Are we going to resurface? Are we going to live? Do we have anything left in this life? But something unusual happened in the city of Jerusalem 2 millennia ago. Something unexpected. For 3 days after his death, on the evening of that first day of the week, John writes, when the disciples were together, when the doors were locked because of fear, for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After this, he said, "Look," he showed them his hands and his sides, and the disciples were overjoyed. They saw the Lord. And again, Jesus said, "Peace, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them. And said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." Something unusual happened that first Easter morning. Something completely unexpected. Jesus, the Messiah, who was crucified and dead, was now alive from the dead. And he appeared to them, not just this time, but many other times. And these early followers of Christ, these men and women, knew for a fact that Christ is risen. Christ is risen. And they went on to turn the world upside down. On Good Friday, my brother had a Good Friday service in Dallas at Clyde Warren Park. There were around 10,000 people at that park in Dallas to hear of the Good Friday service. During the entire service and during his sermon, there were people there, agitators, with bullhorns and GoPros strapped to their chest, so if someone touched them, they could sue them. And they were yelling and shouting on the bullhorn, the whole time during his message, trying to drown out the message of the gospel. But they failed. Just like the Romans tried to drown out the gospel in the first few centuries of Christianity, they failed. Others tried to drown out the gospel. The communists tried to drown out the gospel. But you can't drown out the truth and the reality that Christ is alive. You can't drown it out. Now you may say, well, perhaps they just made this up. These first believers, these early disciples, they just made this up. They made this resurrection up. Well, that doesn't make any sense at all. Zero sense. First of all, if you've ever really experienced grief in your life, when you've lost a loved one, when you are grieving and hurting and in pain, you don't feel like making up some story that's going to get you killed and your family ostracized from society. That just doesn't make any sense at all. Plus, they'd had to invent a whole new branch of Judaism, which they were a part of, which would have contradicted what they believed. They weren't ready to make that up. That's insane. There's a guy who came to our church many years ago. His name's Frank. He was a very successful attorney, brilliant guy, great thinker, card-carrying atheist. This is years ago. He was in his 40s, and someone invited him to church, and then someone challenged him. Hey, Frank, I challenge you to read the Gospels. Read the Gospels. And read this about church history. So he studied, and he read, and he studied, and he read, and he studied, and he read. And finally, Frank was just enamored and couldn't get over the fact that all of the early followers of Christ, all these early disciples, with the exception of John, died a martyr's death believing in the bodily resurrection of Christ. They all went to their grave, fearless, confident, with peace and power, and none of them recanted. And this attorney said, I couldn't get over the evidence. I couldn't get over the evidence. So eventually Frank gave his heart and his life to Jesus Christ, and he's been following him for many, many decades. It was the evidence of the resurrection that convinced him. Now next week, we have church here every Sunday. Next week, come on, Creasters, help me out. Next week, I'm going to talk about, is there evidence for God? Because I'll talk to people a lot. They go, I just don't believe there's any evidence for God. Is there evidence for God? I'm going to look at scientific, philosophical, and existential evidence. That's next week. So come back next week. You'll get a bonus if you come back next week. You won't believe it. We may have some more sunglasses. But I asked myself, how in the world did these disciples, these first followers of Christ, how did they pull it off? How did they withstand the heat? How did they withstand the persecution? How did they spread the good news of Christ and his death and resurrection in the Roman world? They had no money. They weren't really educated. They didn't have any guns or bombs or armies or write any books. They just had this life-changing message and this reality that God had appeared to them in Christ, and that death was no longer the final word, and that Christ could conquer our fears. They made it because they tethered their life to the risen Christ. They tethered their life, their hope, their future to the risen Christ. About a week after my kind of near drowning experience in the Gulf of Mexico, I called a buddy of mine, old surfer. He's been surfing for 50 years. He surfed all over the world. He used to live in Hawaii. He knows surfing. He knows the ocean. And I told him what happened. Like, I mean, you're not going to believe this. And at Surfside, bro, Surfside. You know? Come on. This is what happened. I told him the situation of this, how, I couldn't do this. I started swimming. And my old friend said, bro, you forgot the first step. You forgot the first step. This first step has saved me many, many times from drowning. Whenever you get hit by a big wave and you're knocked underwater and you're spinning, you're upside down, and you don't know which way to go, reach down to your ankle and grab a hold of your leash and climb up the leash, because it's tethered to the surfboard on the surface that's floating, and that will save your life. I knew that. I had done that before. But in that moment, in those murky waters, I forgot that I was tethered. so many times. It's easy. In our jobs, in our career, as we're facing challenges and problems, as we're thinking about the future, or if we feel like we're caught in the murky waters of life spinning around, it's easy to forget who we're tethered to. Who we're tethered to. If you said yes to him, like my friend Frank did many years ago, then you are tethered to the risen Christ. Remember who you're tethered to. And when you do, he will take those fears and they will be absolved. He will wash them away and he will replace it with his confidence and his boldness to face whatever life has for you. When we breathe in this new life of the Spirit, fear has to go. And faith and confidence in Christ floods in. Back in the 70s when there was good music, there was a struggling young couple named Gloria and Bill, and they just had a brand new baby boy. And Bill was just frightened about everything that was happening in the world and in the United States, and there were long gas lines, and there was tension and fighting, and he was like, how is my little infant boy, how is he gonna grow up? How is he gonna make it? And he was overwhelmed by fear and worry. And as he sat there fretting and worrying and kind of submerged in that situation, he took out a pen and a piece of paper and he wrote down these words that became a song. He said, how sweet to hold a newborn baby and feel the pride and the joy he gives. But greater still, the calm assurance he wrote, we can face uncertainty and uncertain days just because he lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future. And life is worth the living just because he lives. He lives.